So you want to start collecting games for the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive? Well, here is my ultimate guide to collecting for Sega's 16-bit console. I've been collecting for the Sega Mega Drive since 1990, since it first came out, and nearly every single year I've purchased a game. But in the last 5 years, I've really ramped up my collecting, and I've learnt a ton about the console, the games, and what it takes to collect games for the Mega Drive. Now this guide does cover Genesis and Mega Drive, but obviously, because I'm a PAL collector, there's a slight lean to the PAL collection. But everything's relevant, and as we go through this video, I'll be dropping in some trivia and tips as well. The first rule for collecting for the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive is collect whatever you want. In any collecting community, there are those that have that little bit more knowledge than you do, and some of them, a very few of them, will tell you what you can and can't collect. They're not bad people, it's just that extra knowledge has gone to their head and makes them feel all powerful. Stick to what you want. If you want to collect repro games, collect repro games. If you're collecting carts only, collect those. Instruction manuals, carts and box. If you're going to buy complete in box with instructions, with the tab on it, and you're never going to play it, that's your choice, do it. If you want to encase it in a slab of perspex, absolutely fine. Collect what makes you happy. Did you know that the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive has 2 games ported to it from the Nintendo Switch? That's right, PSCD Games have ported 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and Bone Marrow, both independent games made on the Nintendo Switch, now on your Sega Genesis and Mega Drive. Beware of buying games on eBay that tell you that the Sega Mega Drive game they're selling is rare. Very few games for the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis are rare, probably less than the fingers you have on one hand. The Sega Mega Drive and Genesis sold tens of millions of units, and the attach ratio was well over 6. What I mean by attach ratio, how many games were sold per user. So more than 6 games were bought by every single user on average for the console. Sega also didn't print limited runs of games. They didn't print a few hundred games there and a few games there. They were printed in the thousands and tens of thousands. Those were minimum orders. And so whenever you see a game up on eBay that says rare Sega Mega Drive, rare Sega Genesis game, the reality is probably has thousands of brothers and sisters out there in the real world. The thing you are going to be affected though is by scarcity. How scarce is a game? And that's what pushes the price up. So you want to get into collecting Sega Genesis and Mega Drive games but don't know how much they cost? Well, I've got a breakdown of how much you're going to spend if you want to collect a full Sega Mega Drive and Genesis collection, or if you just want to get into collecting some of your favorite games that you had nostalgia for. So the remaining 100 games that I've got are a good cross-section of the entire catalogue. It's not one-to-one, and for Sega Genesis owners, some of these prices will be a little cheaper than they are here in Europe. But I have 5 price points that I categorise my collection by. I've got the 0 to 50 range, the 51 to 100, 100 to 200, games that cost 200 to 400, and then 400 plus. Now, as you expect, the lower end is where the bulk of this collection is. I've got 44 games, so 44% of games, outstanding for this collection that are between 0 and £50. Pretty good. 44 games at the cheaper end, that's nearly half the collection. After that, I've got 31 games that are between 51 and $100. So 75% of them are at the cheaper end of what games cost for the Sega Mega Drive. Now, the 44 games come up to a total of £1,330, and then the 31 games, these are the games that are 51 to £100. Those 31 games cost £2,222 to collect. And I've gone through eBay and I regularly check prices to make sure that these are relatively accurate. So that altogether comes up to £3,550 that I would have to spend to get the remaining 75% of these games. So 75 games, because I've got 100 left, 75%. But here's the real kicker. Of the total cost of all these games, once I add these games in plus what we're going to go through next, the expensive games, this 75% only accounts for 28% of what I have left to spend. Only 28%. The remaining 25% makes up 72% of what I have to spend. So let's go through that. In the 101 to 200 bracket, I've got 11 games. Those 11 games are going to cost me £1,750 to buy. Then in the 200 to 400 pound bracket, there are 9 games. These 9 games are going to cost me £2,980. And then finally in the 400 plus, there are 5 games. And these 5 games are going to cost me £4,200. So this bracket of only 25% of remaining games are going to cost me a total of £8,930. That's a total of £12,480. So you can see the lower end of the spectrum is relatively achievable, and this is true, I think, generally for the full Mega Drive collection. If you're collecting the more common titles, they're going to range between $0 and $100, and they're going to be quite easy to get hold of. But as you get into that last 25% of the collection, or if there are games that sit in that last 25% of the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive collection, these are where things get pricey. So for me, with only 100 games left to get to have a full PAL collection, I'm looking at spending that £12,480. An awesome place to get forgotten knowledge about your favourite console is from old magazines. These had amazing articles in them, but more than that, advertisements for peripherals that people have forgotten about. It's a great place to learn about the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive. But getting hold of these magazines isn't always easy, and some of them can command hefty prices. If you want a full collection of this, the Sega magazine, you're paying hundreds just to get them. Did you know that hang tabs are often missing from the boxes because the stores used to cut them off? That's right, store clerks used to cut the top of these hang tabs off so they can fit them neatly on the shelf without them getting caught on the edge. Sega saw this happening and so built in a handy little extra option for all those store clerks who were fed up with cutting off their hang tabs. With the Generation 2 cases, blue spine for PAL countries, they added a little notch at the top, and so you could click down the hang tab and store it safely on the store shelf. Now, something that's become more popular in recent years are graded games. These are sealed games that are then encased in perspex and given a grade, and they often sell for hundreds, even thousands of pounds and dollars. And the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive has its own version of these graded games. But here's the thing, Sega never sealed their games. When you got a Sega game fresh from the factory, all that happened was the Sega sticker was put over the top of it, a box was opened, and it was put next to 20 other games. Now, there could also be boxes of 5 or 10, I only know about boxes of 20, but that doesn't really matter. The key thing here is Sega never sealed their games. Sealing their games would have put the bomb up. This is the bill of manufacturing. And this would have cost them cents on each one of those games, and that mounts up into millions. The other reason is because stores would often take out those games and manuals and put them underneath the counter, and having to unwrap all those games would have been an absolute nightmare. So Sega never sealed those games. So who did? You see, when Sega sold their games, they'd sell to big buyers, stores like Walmart or Toys R Us. They wouldn't sell to individual little stores. For all of those stores, they sold to distributors. Now, what distributors would do would buy in volume and then sell on to the smaller stores. And some of these distributors may have sealed those games. Some of them definitely put them in blister packs. And this is genuinely what you're getting. You're not getting an authentically sealed Sega game. You're getting a Sega game that was wrapped and sealed by a distributor. Now, if you're a collector of these sealed games and you like to stick them in those Perspex boxes and get them graded, there's no way you're going to break the seal on this to find out if this is a genuinely sealed Sega Mega Drive game. And so what you could find in there is nothing. It could be a block of wood and some paper. You'll never know. But the key thing is, it was never sealed by Sega. Clamshell boxes. These are the things that keep Sega Mega Drive and Genesis games in such great condition. It's the reason why it's easy for us to buy complete in-box games for our Sega 16-bit console. But not all clamshells are equal. Whilst most clamshells were manufactured by Sega themselves, a number of them were manufactured by the publisher. A great example of this is EA Games. They made their own cartridges and their own clamshells. But there are also a number of other publishers that make clamshells very similar to Sega, and it's really important that you get the correct clamshell with the correct box, because if you're going to spend a lot of money on some of these Sega Genesis and Mega Drive games, you want to make sure you're getting the genuine article. Now, if you're buying a Konami game, Konami games came with their own branded boxes. If you open up the box inside, you'll see that there's Konami printed on the inside of it. If you buy a Konami game and you have Sega printed on it, what you have here is someone has replaced the clamshell for this game, and maybe even replaced the sleeve as well. Other manufacturers that did this were Codemasters and Acclaim, and you want to make sure that you check all these boxes before you purchase them, especially if you're buying some of those expensive ones. Here's a little tip for all you PAL collectors out there. If you buy the EA Classics edition of Lotus 2 Rex, make sure you check the game inside. More often than not, this game comes with Lotus 1 inside, despite being Lotus 2. Sega fanboys like myself always like to mock Nintendo fanboys like me about the fact that their games were encased in cardboard and we had awesome plastic clamshells. But did you know the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis has a ton of games that also only come in cardboard boxes? In PAL territories, we would get 14 games in cardboard boxes. 13 of them were the Accolade series, 1 was Sonic and Knuckles, and then there was 1 variant, making a total of 15, and that was Bubsy in Australia. Whereas on the Genesis, there were over 62 cardboard boxes, a mixture of slide outs and flip tops. There was also mega hits where the entire series came in cardboard boxes, and if you want to count variants, re-releases of games, it took it to over 100 games that came in cardboard on the Sega Genesis. And if you want to protect these cardboard games that you've bought for your Sega Genesis and Mega Drive, the best thing you can do is buy a Super Nintendo plastic protector. These protectors are a perfect fit for the cardboard Sega Mega Drive and Genesis games. PAL owners, did you know the first Blue Spine game was supposed to be Sonic 3? But Sonic 3 was delayed past Christmas, and so Eternal Champions became the first Blue Spine game. Believe it or not, developers are still creating games for the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive. Games like this, 𝗬𝗄𝗄. This is an officially licensed re-release of the game. Now, it came out on the Genesis and the Japanese Mega Drive, but never in Europe. So for European owners, this is the first time they can get their hands on an officially released game 20 odd years after it was made. And games like this, Insane Pain, this is the latest game as of today to come out for the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive. A brand new game in the style of Killer Instinct on the Super Nintendo. The independent development scene on the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive is one of the healthiest in the industry. Tens of games are released each year, and a number of them are AAA quality games. It's not just limited to brand new games either. A lot of old classics are getting remasters. One of the best is Mortal Kombat for the Mega Drive and Genesis. It got a complete remaster by Master 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, who created a brand new color palette for the entire game, bringing it closer to the arcade version. There's also Mega Final Fight, which ports the best elements of the arcade and Mega CD version to the Sega Mega Drive, and it's looking like one of the best ports of a classic arcade game ever to hit a 16-bit console. Now, if this sort of thing excites you as much as it excites me, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because that's what we cover on this channel. Brand new games for the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive, remasters and remakes, giving a platform to those independent developers who are making such amazing projects for our awesome Sega 16-bit console. The Sega Mega Drive had its greatest success in places like Brazil, Europe, and Australia. But did you know Russia had a huge following for the 16-bit console? Except it wasn't necessarily official hardware and software. There was a huge bootleg industry in Russia that served Russian gamers. You could buy games like this, Mario 4, or the awesome port of Commandos to the Sega Mega Drive. This is a bootleg game that if you've not played it, you definitely need to get your hands on. It's a stunning port of a PC game that was seemingly impossible to run on Sega's 16-bit console. Both the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive had a ton of first-party and third-party peripherals made for it, but be careful when you buy these, because not all of them were well supported. Things like the mouse are an awesome addition, but only a few games used it. Light guns are the same, awesome peripheral, but only a few games to play for them. Instead, if you're going to invest some money into a peripheral, buy something like a joystick or a joypad where you'll know there's almost 100% compatibility with the games that you're going to collect for your console. I love collecting for the Sega Mega Drive. It gives me a huge amount of joy to learn about all these games, the history of the consoles, its peripheral, the company itself, and there's an amazing community around it. Now, I'm not the font of all knowledge for the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive. There are a huge number of people out there doing amazing work in documenting and sharing their knowledge of the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive. And if you really want to get into this, if you want to learn more about it, I recommend that you go and check out those people's websites, channels and books. But if you enjoy videos like this, if you love collecting for the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive, or want to get into retro gaming, then why not consider subscribing? You can do that by clicking on a little button just below this video. We put out brand new shows every single Monday, and so that you never miss it, you can also click on a little bell, also just below this video. If you can't wait until Monday, don't worry, because we've got a huge back catalogue of retro gaming videos for you to enjoy, 2 of which you can watch over here.